Welcome. This is Jack Zenger. We have titled today's webinar, Asking for Feedback, Giving You Nightmares. We will be the first to acknowledge that the picture you're looking at on the screen is not a really welcoming picture, but it does describe kind of the people's fear about this topic. So I'm accompanied today by my colleague, Joyce Palovitz.
Hello. Jack, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. I think this is a topic that a lot of people are going to find interesting, especially as we kind of get to the end of the year and people are perhaps getting ready for performance appraisals. Probably a good topic to talk about anytime, but particularly now. So we hope that we are going to provide some tricks and treats that are very low-cal and sugar-free to help people manage feedback a little bit better. So we are going to invite you to do some live polling with us in this webinar. You're going to be able to participate. And we've asked you to have your phones ready. We would ask you right now to text Be Great. You can see it on your screen to the number you see on your screen, 22333. And if you text Be Great to that number, you're going to receive a text message that comes back and says, well, thank you for your $10 donation to us today. Not really. What you're really going to see is a text message that says you've joined Zenger Folkman's meeting. And so we're inviting you into our meeting through this. We're going to do some polls throughout the webinar today, but you only need to join once. And Jack, we're using this technology. You've used polling technology. What kind of benefits do we get from just being able to participate this way?
Well, we found that people just feel very engaged through the entire presentation, and we find that they really enjoy kind of seeing their views up on the screen and have a chance to kind of be heard. We've had great experience. We've only had one problem that someone could not have his phone work. And in this case, when we got over to him and talked to him about it, we discovered that it was he was using a BlackBerry. And we said, well,
and that just wouldn't work.
that may be the problem. There are not a lot of those still in use. So
not many.
We hope that all of you have got either an Android or iPhone that's working successfully here.
So let's do a quick test. We're going to give you a couple of food choices now, and we want your honest answer. Which one of these two represent your food choice? A cupcake or some nice, healthy kale? So let's see your choices. And I don't know, Jack, do you think people are being honest here?
Well, yeah, I think they're being honest. There are a few people who really are devoted to kale. I would tell those people, don't come by my house at Halloween getting a trick or treat. You aren't likely to get kale.
You'd get a cupcake.
They'd be much more likely to get a cupcake. Yes. Now it looks like people have weighed in kind of. And we'll assume that those who said kale really do eat
healthy.
Yeah, they do.
Okay. Well, now let's do one for real. We are interested in your response to this question. If you were honest, which of these three activities do you do the most often? Do you think you spend more time coaching others, giving feedback to others, or asking for feedback from others? So which of those do you think you do the most often? And we ask this of people in some of our in-person workshops, and we'll tell you in a moment what we tend to find. So we're seeing your results right now. When we ask this question in person, we find that there's just very, very few people who say they spend very much time asking for feedback from others. They spend a lot of time coaching, which is great, or giving feedback. But when they say, well, if I'm honest, I don't really spend much time asking for feedback. And yes, Jack, we've got some important research insights into why it's so important for leaders to get into the habit of asking for feedback. Let's share some of that with the group.
Absolutely. So we know that giving feedback is an extremely useful skill for a manager to possess. But guess what? We've learned from our research that asking for feedback is even more important. And the data that you're seeing in front of you on this slide sort of depicts that research. So on the vertical axis, we have leadership effectiveness as measured through a 360-degree feedback instrument. And this is the overall score, the aggregate score for each individual. On the horizontal axis, we have the leader's activity in looking for opportunities to receive feedback that he or she is asking for because they really want to use it for their personal improvement. You see there the bottom 10%, and then on the 25% block, there's the second bar, and then the middle bar, the 30%, the people around the average, and so forth. And you see this very dramatic kind of escalation from the 15th percentile for those who are at the bottom decile of asking for feedback, all the way up to the 86th percentile for those who are prone to be, frequently asking for feedback that they really intend to use. So it's a powerful kind of depiction of the importance of managers asking for feedback as well as being willing to give feedback.
So you think that, if I saw this, I'd say, boy, I want to get out there and start asking for feedback a lot more often. There seems to be a very strong correlation between my doing that and how other people perceive me as a leader. So why is asking for feedback so hard for us? And as we've thought about this, we've thought, there's probably a few reasons. So sometimes people say, well, it sounds like I'm just fishing for a compliment, and I don't want to be that person. Sometimes we're in a situation where we don't want to put the other person in an awkward position or make them feel uncomfortable. Some people say, if I ask for feedback, it's going to look like I don't have any self-confidence and I'm a little insecure. And then some people say, look, I'm already getting more than I need. I don't really need to get any more. Jack, do these kind of ring true for you? Do you hear any other kinds of excuses for why we find feedback so hard to ask for?
Joyce, I think it differs for each of us. I think maybe one more that you could add to that list is that we're uncertain about the answers that we're going to receive, and most of us like more predictability and certainty in our lives. I'm worried that the answer I get to my question may be critical or may be negative, and so I think that there's that kind of makes people sometimes pause in doing that.
Yeah, and so it's this interesting thing. We know we need it, and yet there are some barriers to doing it. We want to try to help unpack that a little bit and make it a little bit more simple and practical for all of us to do more of this. So as I thought about this, I thought, well, what really drives our need for feedback? And I began to think, there's probably some very rational reasons that I want to get feedback. I used to live in New York City. I lived in New York City for a number of years, and we used to have a mayor, Ed Koch. He'd go around, he'd actually walk up the street, and he'd walk up to people and he'd say, how am I doing? And I think we honestly really want to know, how are we doing? Now, sometimes he didn't like the answers that he got, but he became known for being the guy who would ask that question. So I think a lot of times we really do want to know, how am I doing in my day-to-day performance? Sometimes it's more a reflection of something that just happened, a situation or a context, a meeting. How did I do in that presentation or in that meeting, on that client call? And then sometimes our need for feedback is actually quite aspirational. It's future looking. How can I do more? I want to know, what do I need to know about myself so that I can grow and advance? So I think there are some rational things going on, very good reasons for us to want feedback. But I also believe there's an emotional element as well that we need to be mindful of. I'm asking things like, am I valued as a team member? do I have some predictability about my future? Do others respect me and what I have to offer? And can I do what I need to do in my role? I don't know, Jack, would you say there are any other kind of emotional components to feedback that kind of we need to be aware of if we're going to get really better at asking for it?
I think the feedback just impacts so many dimensions of people's inner set of needs in terms of understanding, my position in the group. Feedback can be threatening to how I see myself in terms of my status in the group compared to you. It can be, kind of my ability to predict my future, my own just sense of well-being and purpose in the group. So I think the whole feedback issue does have a broad-ranging impact on everyone's kind of emotional well-being.
So I know one really great way to get more of the kind of actionable feedback that's so important to me and that I need. And what do you think that is?
Well, I think the answer is you get it when you ask for it.
You do, don't you? And so probably the more you ask, the more you'll get. You and our colleague Kathleen Stinnett a number of years ago developed this very simple, practical model that we have shared with managers in terms of a coaching context, in terms of a providing feedback context. And I think that same model could be useful to people who want to build their muscle at asking for feedback. But before we ask you to share that model with us, I'm thinking we need to kind of get some sense from our listeners about how they typically approach asking for feedback. So, folks, we've got some choices for you. When you're approaching asking for feedback, how do you handle it? Do you just wing it? Do you sit around and think about, okay, it's going to be bad, so I need to prepare myself for that? Or do you sit and carefully craft very specific questions? So let's see what you have to say about that. And Jack, the results are coming in now.
Yes, they are, and I think there's lots of insight here.
So people usually say I wing it, right? I think we'd like to believe we plan for it a little bit more, but most people we find say that they wing it.
That seems to be the most popular kind of response, and I think that's from my experience, that's the most accurate response. Probably the least frequent practice is to carefully think through what you're after and what kind of questions you're going to ask to elicit that.
Yeah. Why do you think people wing it so much? I mean, it seems to be so important. Why do you think we wing it?
I think it's because there's never been any kind of very thoughtful training or development on how to kind of utilize this specific skill. It's not something that's been talked about or written about very, very much. It's not something your parents teach you. There's certainly a period in our life where we feel like we're getting more feedback than we want. So I think there's probably a number of reasons why people tend to wing it.
I think one of the reasons is it's helpful if you've got a framework or a model that you can use, that you can call on whenever you need to. And that's why I really, as we started to look at that, well, how do we help people ask for feedback? And we went back and we said, well, actually, we probably already have a really good model for that. Would you explain to our listeners the FUEL model that you and Kathleen developed and how you just would talk about it at a very high level of detail, and then we'll go into some of the specifics about using the model to ask for feedback.
You bet. I suspect I'm not alone, that in any conversation you're having, whether it's conducting an interview or whether it's giving a presentation or whatever it is that you're doing, it really helps to have an overall structure of where you're going. If I'm driving in the car, it really helps me to have a map to see, what road am I taking and where's my destination on that map. It really does, I think, provide that kind of that track to follow, path to keep on. And I guess in my life, I've really found that there's nothing more liberating than having structure. And I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive and sort of, maybe a contradiction, but I just have found, and I think when you get people to stop and think about it, there is something very liberating about having a structure to follow. So, like you say, Kathleen Stinnett and I, when we wrote the book, The Extraordinary Coach, she had this wonderful phrase that the structure we're trying to provide people should be a framework, not a cage.
Right.
And this structure may encompass an hour-long conversation or an hour-and-a-half-long conversation. Or it could also be pretty much done in a very brief conversation, such as 30 seconds. So it isn't the length of time, but it is kind of each of these steps in this framework describes a phase that is useful to go through. And when you bypass one of them, you end up having to kind of circle back and do it at a later time. So the framework has the acronym FUEL, and it begins by saying one thing you need to do when you begin any conversation is to have some general boundaries for it. What's the topic? How much time do I have? What's the nature of this conversation? What's the objective I want to, what are my end goals in this conversation? So it generally is that process of framing the whole dialogue. The second phase is what you're using this process to do is to help you gain a deeper understanding of what's really happening right now. And so the U talks about understanding the current state. Now, in one sense, if you are initiating this conversation and you are asking somebody else for feedback, your understanding, of course, is very important, but you're assuming that they may have an understanding which is somewhat different from yours, and therefore you're wanting to understand it from their point of view. The E in the FUEL model represents the exploratory. It is the stage. It is trying to say, okay, if I understand how things are happening and what's going on now, what would I like it to be? What's the ideal future? And this exploring the desired state is a phase that can be done fairly quickly in many cases, but it is the third phase. The final phase is this creating a plan, a map for implementation. So L stands for laying out a successful implementation of what you're wanting to accomplish.
So one of the things I like, there's a pivot point between the U and the E that kind of takes you from where am I versus where I want to be. And it really does move it from a past or a present state into the future state. And I think sometimes feedback is a misnomer. It should be called feed forward because ideally it's designed to kind of take you into a better place. We thought it might be helpful to unpack this a little bit. And look, I'm not a golfer, but there was a time in my life when I did try to learn to play golf. And one of the things I know you had to do was you had to kind of isolate the various aspects of playing golf in order to be able to go out and play 9 or 18 holes. And so one of the things we find with the FUEL model is it's useful to kind of really isolate and look at each one of these stages, even though in an actual conversation it flows or should flow much more smoothly. And so, as you said, Jack, if I'm going to ask for feedback, I have the advantage, if I'm going to initiate the conversation, of being able to plan for it. And so we thought we might share with our listeners a little bit about how you might plan for that part of the conversation and then what it might sound like. So we're going to just take everybody through this in a kind of a slow way so that we can talk about how might it all fit together in a conversation. So if we talk about framing first, these are some ideas that we came up with for how you might plan the conversation. to think about, well, what's the topic? I mean, just the basic. What do I want feedback on? Is it a performance-related thing? Is it situational? Is it aspirational? What do I want to talk about? What approach is going to be most helpful to me? And we'll talk a little bit like, am I going to say, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I want to get feedback from you? How do I want to approach this conversation? Do I want to invite my thought partner to give me both positive and negative messages? Do I need to make them comfortable to give me feedback? I want honest feedback. And then this kind of, what outcome do I want to achieve so that I can communicate that? And then, I don't know, Jack, I'll be curious to hear your comments on this, but here's how we think you might say some of these messages when you're actually in the conversation. So I might start out by saying, I'd like to get your feedback on something, or I might want to communicate, it's important to me because. I might want to ask, do you have some time to chat right now? I might want to convey that your honest feedback is what would be most helpful to me. And you can see the other ones here. And I might even say, look, here's what I want to accomplish by this conversation. And so you can see that if I thought about what do I want as an outcome here, I can do a really nice job of framing it so that the other person understands my intention. And I launched the conversation in a really successful way. I don't know, Jack, you're the expert on this. Would you add anything to how you might frame the conversation?
Well, no, but I think this first phase is so vital because it really does begin to narrow it down a bit. So as Ed Koch is walking out on the streets of New York, he can ask people about, so how are the potholes these days? Or are the sidewalks clean? Or do you feel safe at night when you're out walking? So by the questions he asks, he can really zero in on the things that he's most concerned about. But embedded in each of those questions is the implicit message that I really do want to hear something that informs me and gives me some sense of what I might do better as a leader or as the mayor of New York. And so I think right off the bat, if we are all clear that the end objective of these conversations is to come away with ideas that we can then take back and implement in our daily behavior as a leader and to help us be more effective.
Right. And already we're eliminating that thing. I'm not fishing for compliments. I honestly want to engage in a conversation with you about that topic. Well, we've also thought about, well, how might I plan to expand my awareness in the understand phase of the conversation? So if I'm thoughtful going into the conversation, I might be thinking about, well, what specific insights do I want to hear from my partner here? Do I want to offer what I think is going well? So in a performance conversation, I want to say, well, here's my thought on what I'm doing well. And here's where I need more clarity. And I love the idea of clarity in these kinds of conversations because I'm inviting the other person to help me get clearer about something, not to judge me, but rather to help me gain insight and clarity. And so how that might sound is what you can see here on the right side of our slide. I might start saying, here are my perceptions, here's what I thought did well, here's what I thought could have gone better. I might want to explore a little bit about how is my approach or behavior impacting others. Oftentimes it's very useful to get some specific examples, especially if I'm not really clear on what the person might be telling me. And you can see some of the other ones here. What did I do to attract it or got in the way? And then this last question I really want to highlight because I think sometimes we think we've emptied the person of everything they have to say, and a what else or an anything else question really invites them to say anything else that they think might be helpful for me to know.
Yeah, because you'd hope that in the course of that conversation that you've said something that triggers a new idea in their mind.
Right.
In the course of that dialogue, they've thought of something new. Yeah.
And I've just always found that when I ask, well, what else do you think it's important for me to know? And if I just wait, sometimes the person actually comes up with a real gem that maybe they just needed a little bit more time to think about. And sometimes they say, no, I think that covers it, and that's good too. We're now at this pivot point where we pivot from, okay, now I have a better awareness, I have better insight. Now I need to think about, well, how will I pivot? And so in some conversations, I might plan to already explore ideas for what I can do differently. I might plan to think about, are there any barriers? Will I ask a question about, are there any barriers that will prevent me from acting on the feedback? And I might want to think about, especially in those conversations where I'm not sure if I'm going to get maybe a real boatload of negative messages, I want to stay focused on the future and on positive outcomes. So do I need to have in my hip pocket some questions that will help me do that? So Jackie, here's some questions that we've got up here to say, here's how you might actually say some of that. What would you add anything to this? Do you have a favorite question that you like to ask that kind of gets you future focused, which is the whole point of this, of course?
Yeah, no, but I would just comment on the very first how you might say it item there is, what should I be sure to continue in the future? I think it is important in these conversations to not always make it, what should I start doing or what should I stop doing or, what's wrong, but to really find out, what am I doing now that should be certain to be continued, that you're finding to be really helpful in how things are progressing. So I wouldn't hesitate to ask the positive question, and particularly the positive question first, because this usually makes it easier for the person to then offer you any suggestion about, well, you might also start doing such and such, or you might stop doing something. But if they've told you what they like, that's going to be helpful. So I believe you've got up there the basic elements. What should I continue? What should I stop? What should I start doing? How would an optimum performance be? Those are all kind of, I think, the right way to get at what's the future state that we're aspiring to.
Great. Well, we come to the last, the L part of the fuel conversation. And, we can't even plan a little bit of this, even though we don't know exactly how the conversation is going to go. We can't presuppose what we're going to hear. That's the whole reason we're having the conversation. But we can start to think about, well, I want to demonstrate to this person that I do intend to commit to implementing this feedback that I'm getting. And I might also want to ask this person to be a resource for me in the future and help me act on it. And so some of the ways we might say those kinds of things are what you see on the screen now. Based on what you're telling me, here's what I think I'm inclined to do. I might want to just make sure, I want to play back to you what I've heard. Am I hearing this well? I might want to ask the person, what would you add to my plan? And then can I follow up with you later? Would you continue to give me feedback on this if you have an opportunity? Jack, anything else you would say that's important about closing out a feedback conversation when I've asked for feedback?
One would be something that you might want to say, and that's just to express your personal, sincere appreciation for what they've said to you, and to let them know that you really do appreciate candor and honesty. I think there's also something you can do physically, and that is, not only is it the expression on your face and your body language, but it's also getting out a piece of paper and a pen or pencil and writing down just a few words that will help you to remember what it is that they've said. I find that people are very appreciative when they see that you're taking their comments seriously. And one way of conveying that is that you've written it down somewhere, that you can access it, come back to it, do it.
Right. Great. So just to summarize, here's the fuel model again. And in a moment, we'll talk about how you might do that in a more on-the-fly kind of a way. But just to summarize, framing the conversation, a few words, a few sentences that will convey the intent that you have. Questions that will help you expand your own awareness of what the other person is seeing. Staying future focused in terms of exploring and asking questions that will help you get clarity about what great performance looks like, and then committing to a plan to continue. Well, we want to hear from you now. So this is going to be a word cloud. Hopefully you've experienced a word cloud before, lots of fun, but in 1 or 2 words, how would having a plan, improve your ability to get feedback? So we'll just a couple of words. We'll see how many words we can get up on the screen and see what your thoughts are about this. Jack, I think we probably need to record this for posterity.
There's some good expressions and good words up there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people are saying it does keep things on track and keeps it focused, keeps it practical, makes it actionable, signals your seriousness about that. Yeah.
Yep.
A lot of good thoughts.
A lot of good thoughts, and thank you for adding to that, everyone. Well, okay, so sometimes you need to get feedback on the fly. Maybe you're just coming out of a meeting with someone, and I know this happens to me. I'll be in a meeting, and I'll think, I'm not sure I got my point across as well as I had intended, and I want to go to a colleague and get some feedback. And so, we maintain that you can use fuel on the fly, and it might look something like this. And I'll just kind of go through these slides just to kind of show you how the fuel model might look. Do you have a minute? I'd like your thoughts on something. I want to get your perspective on my comments in the meeting. Where was I effective? Is there something I can do to be more effective? Let the person respond, and then you might come back with thanks for that. Next time, I'm going to make sure that people understand my intent. And look, I want to hear from you again. If we're together in a meeting, let me know how I'm landing on people. And thanks, that thank you. So fuel on the fly doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can look something just like this. I don't know, Jack, do you think fuel on the fly is something we could also do a lot more frequently? I do it to you all the time, I know.
You do. Absolutely. And again, just going back to that very first slide we talked about, giving feedback is a great skill. But if you want to be perceived as a really effective leader, learn to ask for feedback more frequently.
And I suspect the more you do it, the easier it gets and the better it gets. So we say feedback is a gift, but sometimes it looks like the presents I used to wrap for my dear mother, and I didn't wrap it so well. The tape is all over the place. So how do we open the gifts that we don't want, Jack? Sometimes we don't like the feedback that we get. We ask for it, and we get something that we're not expecting. How do you handle that?
You say, when you ask for feedback, you're in a sense looking at the mirror, and sometimes the mirror has a crack in it. And you may look a little bit funny from the mirror perspective, but it's not necessarily all you. It's part of the distortion comes from the mirror. So I think you have to kind of begin just by taking a deep breath, thanking people for the feedback, recognizing that every piece of feedback has some value in it, but what they said to you isn't necessarily truth. It's their perspective. And that's a slice of how the world sees you. But I think if you just don't overly react, realize that this is one of many answers that you may get to the question that you asked, and knowing that someone's out there that has that point of view is probably helpful to you. But you don't need to go jump off the ledge because somebody said something that you don't feel is either correct or not very flattering.
Right. And we've got some other thoughts up here, and, responding with curiosity and compassion and keep asking those questions, not to let it deter you. So we have a question now for our listeners. What percentage of the time do you think people apply the feedback that they get? And we're giving you 4 choices here. Do you think it's 70% of the time? 10% of the time, 30% of the time? We're a research company, so we really had to throw in this very, very specific number of 55.678%, which I'm not sure we have. We go to the the third decimal point on our research all of the time, but let's see what kind of responses we get. I was actually surprised at the research that comes out of this study done at Columbia University.
Yes, it was a little shocking, wasn't it? That should we tell them?
Yeah, we'll tell them. 30% of the time. Oh my gosh, what happens to the other 70% is the question that we wondered about. I was really surprised by that. I mean, I kind of think when I get feedback, I'd like to hope that I act on it, but I guess a lot of stuff is coming our way and we don't always act on it, or maybe we have the intention to act on it, but we don't actually do it. So we have some ideas for how you might turn feedback into change, understanding that our tendency might be to not do that. And some of this is what Jack has already said. Listen and take notes. I don't know. Sometimes I find I might remember some of the conversation, but not all of it. And so note-taking really does help me. And they say, the researchers also say that if we can summarize the feedback, verbally repeat it, and begin to categorize it in our minds. So things I might have said, things I might have done, however we might categorize the feedback, that also helps it sink in.
I also think, Joyce, if you can ask questions of the other person where you seek specific ideas or specific incidents that they're talking about, or asking them for specific suggestions about how you might behave differently in the future, the more you can transfer it from being just a general, wide comment to a very specific, behaviorally focused comment, I think you get more value out of that. I also want to say that while I thoroughly, have no reason to question this research from Columbia, that if they're talking about the general feedback that people receive on a day-to-day basis, think of how different that is than from what you and I have just been talking about for the last few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
true.
When someone deliberately is seeking feedback in a specific area of their behavior, and they ask people whom they trust. So one is, who's the person giving it to you? Am I prepared for it? Am I wanting it? Is this a topic of interest to me? Do I have any intention of wanting to get better at this? When you combine the positive elements of feedback, I believe that this percentage will go way, way up from 30%. Now, is it going to be 90 or 95? You'd hope so, but I think it would be a lot higher than 30 if it met some of the tests or some of the elements that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Well, we certainly hope so, don't we?
We do.
And I really do believe it's very good precursor to getting good feedback and actionable feedback has to do with how you plan, how you go about soliciting it. So we've got a prescription for you, so it's not so scary. Here's the prescription to keep feedback from being scary. A few things just to remember. It doesn't hurt, or it doesn't have to hurt, and it's better than not hearing anything at all. The more the better. With the eating comes the appetite. Looking for trends. The more you ask for feedback, the more you'll start to get trends, and pay attention to that. You might not need to change everything, and sometimes just getting aware of something starts the change. Thank people, keep following up, and our belief is very much that feedback helps you discover and build your strengths, and lets you be your best self in the world. And that's the whole point of getting feedback, is to become your best self as a person and as a leader. So we kind of wonder, well, what's your plan? And we're wondering right now, if you were making a note to yourself, what's going to be your plan for asking for feedback? Who will you ask? How will you do it? How often do you need to ask for feedback? What are some of your drivers right now? Are you thinking about your own performance? A lot of people are coming into performance appraisal time. Has there been a recent situation that you'd actually like to go and ask somebody some feedback on? Are you more thinking about your own growth potential? And how can you let the fuel model help you? Jack said earlier that when we first worked through this model, Kathleen Stinnett said, it's a framework, not a cage. And we have found that there are multiple uses for the fuel model that I'll just share with you, not just in asking for feedback, but in doing coaching, performance and career coaching, change management, providing feedback. We've developed it for a lot of others. We've got one more word cloud for you today, which is, what's your takeaway? What's the thing you're going to do? What's the thing you're going to commit to? And let's give you a moment to help us create another word cloud. And I really like it when people actually start to have a plan for things. Don't you think there's a connection between having a plan and actually doing something?
It's a very direct line, very, very direct.
And then one final word cloud, how do you know when you're successful? One of the areas, the topic areas I've been doing a lot of reading about has to do with deliberate practice and the importance of having something that tells you that you're doing it well or doing it better. So how will you know? And Jack, what do you think would happen if everybody in an organization gets a lot better about asking for feedback? What kinds of positive impacts have we seen from organizations when people are actually doing what people are writing up in the word cloud right now?
I think it would be transformative. If you could get people to really, in a constructive way, get honest information from each other. Everybody, when you talk to them privately, will say that they would like more feedback, more accurate feedback. They want to hear the positive comments, but they also want to hear constructive suggestions for how I should do it differently. But we're not. I don't know very many organizations that are really good at that. But when people get closer to that, they do. It becomes a major transformation in how that organization functions.
Well, we think if our listeners would be interested in talking with us more about this topic of feedback, we've just been exploring a small piece of it today. There's how do you ask for it, but there's also how do you give it, and we'd love to talk with you about that if you'd be interested in hearing more about our thoughts about feedback. We think it's very valuable, and we've got an offer for you if you are one of those people who complete a short survey following this webinar. We will be very pleased to give away some copies of the book that our colleague Joe Folkman wrote on how to turn feedback into change. Now, we've got a few copies to give away, so we'll hold a drawing, but the drawing will be based on those of you who complete the survey. So at the end of the webinar, please feel free to give us your feedback on that survey. We'd love to hear from you. And I guess, Jack, we just want to thank everybody for listening today, and especially for all the future asks that you will make to get feedback from your colleagues and those around you. It's really it's a wonderful habit to develop, and we hope we've given you some insight into how you might make that more practical for you to do on a regular basis. So, Jack, I've had a lot of fun talking with you about this today.
This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Joyce. And thanks to all who attended.
Thanks, everybody.